House. There is no White House invite for the Israeli PM on the horizon in the near term either, if there isn't one by the end of December. Netanyahu would become the first incoming Israeli premier not to get a White House visit in the first year of a term in over 5 decades. So far, Biden has even stayed away from other one-on-one get-togethers with Netanyahu. Okay. To discuss more, we are now being joined by retired Colonel Rich Outzen from Washington, D.C. He is a senior fellow at the Atlantic Council and the Jamestown Foundation. Welcome back to WION, Rich. Great to talk to you. So this meeting also comes shortly after those Americans were released from Iran who were held in captivity, and the United States decided to unfreeze about $6 billion in Iranian assets from South Korea. So how tense will this conversation regarding Iran's role in the region be between Benjamin Netanyahu and President Biden, in your opinion?
Well, Susan, it's good to be with you. Thanks for having me. I think this conversation will be, I think one Israeli commentator called it sour. And of course, in this extraordinarily close relationship between the two allies, this is about as tense as you can get. Why? Because the two men are ideologically from different wings of the political spectrum. Of course, Netanyahu center-right on the Israeli spectrum, and Biden on the liberal/progressive center-left. So already they are at odds with one another on issues such as LGBTQ and other progressive priorities that are not a big deal for Netanyahu. And on the other hand, the biggest thing for Netanyahu is Iran. And this, as you've just mentioned, comes at a time when the Biden administration continues to try to find ways to have a modus vivendi with Iran, including this purchase of captives back from them that you referred to. Now, is it going to be bitter or antagonistic? I don't think so. That's not the tone of the relationship. But this will be much tenser than such meetings typically are.
And what is the theatrics of President Biden not inviting our strongest ally in the region to the White House and instead deciding to meet on the sidelines of the UNGA? First of all, what benefit does this have diplomatically for the United States and the optics of it? What message does this send to allies around the world, in your opinion?
Well, I think for the Biden administration, it's less about allies around the world and more about domestic audiences, frankly. The domestic audiences, including a good portion of the American Jewish community, are very concerned over the judicial reforms in Israel, which have been characterized by some as a judicial coup. Of course, Israel has a very unique system where the judicial branch essentially appoints itself and polices itself. It's not the same sort of balance of powers that we have in the U.S. system. So aside from the judicial reform package, there's just also the idea that Netanyahu is sort of an authoritarian leader who bullies the press and bullies the opposition, whether that's true or not. Certainly Biden's constituents think that it is. And so for those progressive constituencies, it is anathema to think that Biden would embrace people like President Erdogan of Turkey or Prime Minister Netanyahu of Israel, who are seen as, if not authoritarians, at least less democratic than they want to be. So I don't think that it's so much about those international audiences. It's more trying to prove his progressive and democratic bona fides to the home audience.
What an interesting point. All politics really are local at the end of the day, and we are in an election year. Retired Colonel Rich Outzen, thank you so much for joining us, and I look forward to speaking to you again very soon.
Thanks, Susan. Bye-bye.
The U.S. has been trying to rally countries in support of Ukraine at the ongoing United Nations General Assembly while calling out Russia. More in our next report.
World leaders are gathering in New York this week for this year's United Nations General Assembly. On Tuesday, U.S. President Joe Biden and Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky used the event to continue their push for international support in the Ukraine war. But domestic politics in Washington will also likely be in their minds.
Russia alone bears responsibility for this war. Russia alone has the power to end this war immediately.
War crimes must be punished. Deported people must come back home. and the occupier must return to their own land. We must be united to make it, and we will do it. Slava Ukraini.
This Ukraine military video is said to show its forces retaking a village last week. Biden has made rallying allies for Ukraine a centerpiece of his foreign policy, and according to Reuters Ipsos polls, strong majorities of Americans support giving weapons to Ukraine. But he's also faced criticism from some Republicans who want the U.S. to spend less money on it. That includes House Speaker Kevin McCarthy. Zelensky is expected to travel to Washington later this week and meet some congressional leaders, including McCarthy. Former President Trump, now campaigning for the 2024 election, has vowed a quick end to the war if he wins. Trump's skeptical of the United States' traditional allies, such as NATO, and he's been complimentary of Russian President Putin in the past. Meanwhile, back at the UN, President Biden is actually meeting with the presidents of several Asian countries, including Russian allies. Kazakhstan, Tajikistan, and the Kyrgyz Republic are military allies of Russia in the Collective Security Treaty Organization.
Tensions between Canada and India are rising. The diplomatic rift that started with Ottawa accusing New Delhi of being involved in the murder of a Khalistani terrorist, Hardeep Singh Nijjar, has now taken a turn for the worse. India has issued strong worded travel advisory for its nationals, including students in Canada. The travel advisory speaks of growing anti-Indian activities and politically condoned hate crimes, and asks Indians to exercise utmost caution and avoid traveling to regions and potential venues with anti-India activities. Speaking in the Canadian Parliament, Justin Trudeau had said that his country has quote-unquote credible allegations linking agents of the Indian government to the death of Nijjar. Both the countries since then have expelled each other's diplomats. Talks on the proposed trade treaty have also paused for now. The steps can have severe ramifications. Since 2018, India has been the largest source of the country for international students, while the Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement between Canada and India, which has been stalled, could boost two-way trade by as much as $6.5 billion. Several other countries have joined in the row. The UK, the US, and Australia have expressed concern over Canada's allegations, while the UK says its trade negotiations with India would remain unaffected. And according to sources, Canada worked very closely with the United States for intelligence on India's involvement in the murder of the Khalistani leader. The Canadian Prime Minister says that it does not wish to provoke New Delhi. Take a listen.
India and the government of India needs to take this matter with the utmost seriousness. We are doing that. We are not looking to provoke or escalate. We are simply laying out the facts as we understand them, and we want to work with the government of India to lay everything clear and to ensure that there is proper process.
The Indian government has outrightly rejected the allegations, calling them as an absurd and motivated. Nijjar was gunned down on June 18th outside a Sikh cultural center in Surrey, British Columbia. Sikh separatist activists in Canada have been a bone of contention between New Delhi and Ottawa. Canada's opposition leader, Pierre Poilievre, says that the risk could be real if the Trudeau government failed to prove these accusations. Well, for more on the issue, we earlier spoke to former Indian diplomat Pinak Ranjan Chakravarti, who joined us from the Indian capital of New Delhi. Here's what he had to say.
Well, the fact is that India has been complaining for the last 40 to 45 years about the activists, about the activities of these Khalistanis and their violent methods, which has had a fallout in India where politicians have been murdered, where money has come in for all kinds of violent activities. But the Canadians have always tried to hide under the shadow of, under the screen of free speech, etc., and things like that. they have permitted some very horrible things. If you remember the Kanishka air crash, it was engineered by these Khalistani terrorists. The Canadians did nothing almost. I mean, nobody was pulled up. Ultimately, some of them got killed in their internecine war, and this has been going on for quite some time.
Azerbaijan has confirmed that it has reached an agreement on a ceasefire with ethnic Armenian forces in the Nagorno-Karabakh region.
An agreement was reached on the suspension of local anti-terrorist measures. The units of the Armenian armed forces located in the Karabakh region of the Republic of Azerbaijan laid down their weapons, left their combat positions and military posts, and are completely disarmed.
The ethnic forces have also agreed to withdraw all heavy military equipment and positions. Azerbaijan has released a video in which it claims that Armenian forces are leaving the trenches. Azerbaijan's defense ministry on Tuesday said that it had begun an anti-terrorist campaign in the disputed Nagorno-Karabakh region, as Armenian authorities reported heavy bombardment in the regional capital. At least 32 people have been killed and over 138 reported injured amid artillery, missile, and drone strikes by the Azerbaijan military. Nagorno-Karabakh is an ethnic Armenian enclave, internationally recognized as part of Azerbaijan, but part of it is run by separatist Armenian authorities who say the area is their ancestral homeland. The region has been the cause of 2 wars between the neighbors in the past 3 decades alone, and the most recent conflict was nearly 3 years ago. Russian peacekeepers in Nagorno-Karabakh are deployed in the region to help evacuate civilians from the conflict zone. The Kremlin also rejected Armenian assertions that Russia has not done enough to prevent fighting in the Nagorno-Karabakh region. Kremlin says the matter concerned Azerbaijan's actions on its own territory. Moving on to the world of economy, global debt has now hit a historic high, reaching $307 trillion in the second quarter of this year, despite efforts to rein in borrowing with rising interest rates. In this report, we look at what is global debt crisis and who are the ones giving countries this money. When a country wants to borrow, their treasury issues bonds to fund the nation's spending plans. Investors put their money in countries which are considered safe to invest in and whose currencies give good returns. So the surge in global debt suggests countries are borrowing way more than what they can earn. And that is the debt to GDP ratio. In simple terms, suppose you earn $100, your borrowings are 336% of the earnings. Over the past decade, global debt has been on the increase of $100 trillion, with more than 80% of the surge coming from developed nations such as the United States, Japan, Britain, as well as France. Even though the global debt to GDP ratio had been declining prior to 2023, it has now risen for the second consecutive quarter to reach 336%, primarily due to slower economic growth and moderate inflation. While emerging markets like China, India, and Brazil have contributed significantly to this debt buildup, household debt to GDP ratios, that is, in these markets remain elevated. In contrast, mature markets have seen a drop in the ratio to its lowest level in 2 decades in the first half of this year. The ongoing high interest rate environment in the United States may further impact emerging markets, redirecting much needed investment towards safer developed countries. Elon Musk's controversial Neuralink is ready to test its brain chip implant on humans. Musk announced Neuralink has received approval from an independent review board to begin recruitment for the first human trial of its brain implant for paralysis patients. Now, launched in 2016, Nutralink got the U.S. Food and Drug Administration's approval for human trials earlier this year, and now the brain implant company has obtained approval from an independent review board as well. Nutralink can now start its recruitment process for the inaugural human trial of its brain implant chip. Ever since its launch, Nutralink has faced intense scrutiny over alleged animal cruelty, safety hazards, and over-ambitious claims. Musk claims the brain chip interface will one day restore mobility in cases of severe spinal injury, cure Parkinson's, and keeps humans relevant in a world dominated by AI. According to media reports, patients with paralysis due to cervical spinal cord injury or amyotrophic literal sclerosis may qualify for the trial. The company has not disclosed how many people will be enrolled in that trial. The initial goal of Nutralink is to grant paralysis patients the ability to control a computer cursor on keyboards using their thoughts. Nutralink researchers will use a robot to surgically place the implants in a part of the brain that controls movement. The trial is expected to take 6 years to complete, and according to experts, even if Nutralink chip proves to be safe for human use, it would still potentially take more than a decade for the startup to secure commercial use clearance for it. The question remains, if required, would you let Elon Musk implant a device in your brain?
But as I said, we do everything we possibly can. It is.
Do you remember Michael Jackson's famous hat, the one that he wore while performing his legendary moonwalk? Well, that iconic fedora hat is now up for auction. Take a look at our next report for more details.
The year was 1983. Michael Jackson made his famous trademark move, the moonwalk, a seemingly effortless backwards glide while appearing to walk forward. What made his moves more attractive? The king of pop's manner of swiftly wearing and removing the black fedora hat. Usually he would be dancing to his hit track Billie Jean while performing the moonwalk. 4 decades later, this famous hat is up for auction in Paris. It is the star among some 200 items of rock memorabilia. The black fedora hat is expected to fetch up to $107,000. But the organizer of the gallery admits that the valuations for the late pop star's items have fallen lately due to the sale of fakes and also because of the history of child sexual abuse allegations against the singer. The sale will happen on September 26th. Bureau Report, WION World is One.
Today marks the 50th anniversary of a tennis match that changed women's sports forever. Billie Jean King's victory in the match, dubbed the Battle of the Sexes, was a milestone moment as women push for equality on and off the court. On the 20th of September of 1973, a 29-year-old Billie Jean King beat 55-year-old Bobby Riggs in Houston. The clash remains the most watched in the history of sports. But how did the match come about, and what impact did it have on sports? Let's take a look. 3-time Grand Slam champion and former world #1 Riggs made a fortune from gambling on his own tennis matches. A retired Riggs claimed that even at the age of 55, he could beat any active female tennis player. After many failed attempts to lure Billie Jean King, she finally agreed to the match, and 90 million people tuned in on television as King beat Riggs in straight sets at the Houston Astrodome. King and Riggs embraced at the end and became friends off the court until his death in 1995. On Tuesday, King wrote on social media, and this is a quote, "The match was about much more than tennis. It was about social change." King has been a social activist for most of her life. She was the driving force behind the formation of Women's Tennis Association in 1973, a critical moment in the fight for equal opportunities as well as prize money in the sports. It's one of the reasons she will be nominated for the U.S. Congressional Gold Medal and will become the first female athlete to be given that honor. Thank you so much for staying with us and watching WION Live Broadcast from New York City. I'm Susan Tehrani saying goodbye for now.
How did a flash flood claim so many lives?
It's easy to tell you a flat story. It's easy to show you what's happening.